Okay, guys. So I want to go over the assignment in a little bit more detail than what I got you started on a second ago. Um, this is what the assignment is. We're going to start looking at scale of models. And I know we haven't really talked about the scale of the model very much yet, but in order to understand how you want to set scenes for different types of effects, you might want to think about whether or not you're modeling it in full scale or model scale. And what I mean by that is model scale as if you were going to photograph it in a photography studio. So you can't put a building in a studio, right? Unless it's built like a model like you make in your design classes. So to start that conversation, we need to build that build that context around our building. And part of this is designy because you can't just throw anything onto a building and have it look good, or rather, you can't just throw anything onto a site and have it look good, right? You're trying to render to make something look good, and you can't do that unless you've designed what it is you're trying to render. So we're going to take the design of our building from the inside and we're going to start moving it to the outside. So right now I have basically what's called a render model, right? There's no architecture outside of the room that I rendered in an interior environment. And this isn't a normal way of designing, not by any means. I just wanted to keep your minds in a smaller scale before trying to tackle doing an entire building. And it just logistically it works out a little better for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to carry that interior design to the exterior design as if we're shrouding it like a pavilion. So it's not going to necessarily look like a building. In fact, I think some of you might find it intriguing to try and do it this way, where you're designing from the inside out. So there are very few parameters for this. So you can pretty much go anywhere except it needs to be the same design concept, meaning the same architectural moves that you're making on the interior should be evident on the outside. You need to make a site entry because we're going to have to position the camera to show the entry of your building. And you need to build context massing. So I'm going to go backwards through this list here a little bit. But the context massing, I just, for the sake of time, for your sake, I just went through and pulled a site from another project that I did, another rendering class. So this is my massing, but this is kind of what I'm looking for, where depending on which way you put your camera, you may or may not have certain buildings or of different massing and sizes around it. It's not critical, but what you do need to know is that this is a pavilion. It's not a building, so it should be of a smaller scale than the typical building typologies you put around it. Okay. One thing I would absolutely suggest for you is to stick with an urban environment, especially if we're just doing this from scratch as we're trying to develop, I guess, our approach to how we want to frame shots. A little bit of that is just to make it easier on you. But some of that has to do with the fact that, rendering things with higher levels of urbanity tends to give a rendering for something like this a little bit more character than putting it on a hillside. Plus, we're not really going to be dealing with photoreal renderings, so the idea of a house on a hillside with trees and plants and a babbling brook and rocks and mountains and stuff like that is not in the scope of this class. So stick with an urban environment, and so that we keep it within the range of something that you can reasonably do. Okay. So anyway, this is about how far out I'd suggest you put it, because if you're going to look at your building on, say, a corner like this, something like that, right? You can deal with how to frame the edges of this quite easily by framing it up to the edge of the building here, cutting off the building a little bit, or possibly just putting in some extra environment in Photoshop afterwards that just kind of extends that street backwards, which we will go through some post-production stuff on how to do that kind of stuff later in the class. So let's go backwards a little bit more. But are there any questions about that up to this point? Okay, I'm not giving you my model because I want you to pick appropriate scales for what you're trying to do. Okay, so I don't want you to just throw it on my model. Plus, I'm really a strong proponent of you guys each having something that looks very different in your portfolio. So if you all have these really cool structures and they're sitting, and you know the rendering is beautiful and they're sitting in the same site that was just handed to you, and then you go to one of those portfolio days that we were talking about, those job fairs, and 6 of you are in line one after the other, and they flip through your portfolio and they all see the same site with a slightly different structure on there, they're not going to think that you're thinking beyond the building you're designing. So that should occur at all times. You should always be developing something that is you. All right, so let's talk about this site entry. So actually, we can talk about the site entry and the fact that this is a pavilion kind of all at the same time. The interior environment's not going to change. What we're going to have to focus on is what is the entry to my building, right? So, and how am I going to use that architecturally? So if you look at the inside of my space, it's really just a slippage of walls. And I think I'm just going to carry that kind of concept into the pavilion part of my building as well. But there are a couple things I need to do to sort of, I guess, capture that. First and foremost, I have this roof that doesn't really contribute anything to the architectural quality of the exterior of the building. Unless that's what you're going for, but that's not what I'm going for. So is that the curve I want? Yeah, that's the curve I want. So what I'm going to do is just extrude this curve and create like a ceiling piece on it, or a roof piece actually. And I'm going to go 1.5 feet. Okay, I can deal with the details of pulling these surfaces in later. Oh, that's just a surface. That's not even a... Oh, I must have exploded that at some point. But I can clean that stuff up later. So all I'm thinking about right now is showing my design concept, whatever that is, and the slippage of planes and getting into this space. So I'm going to go super simple on this. You guys can probably go a little more, thoughtful and theoretical and, creative. But anyway, what I'm going to do is create a new layer and say exterior shroud or something like that, or just call it exterior plates. And I'm just going to start boxing things out. So I'm going to do L shapes on the outside because in the inside all of my L shapes are there, but they're vertical. But my L shapes are going to be horizontally bending on the outside. And let's make this... Yeah, let's make it orange. I like orange. We'll do a box. I gotta turn project off. There we go. So let's see. Y is up. So let me just say at 1 foot, comma 15 feet. Okay, I'll pull it up to here. Whoops. Oh, I can't get it that way. Let's do it from here to there, and then move it out. Okay. Something like that. I'll clean up the backside maybe later. Let's pull this up a little bit. Alright. There we go. Okay, so I hope you guys caught that. and were watching, I was hearing a lot of clicking, but you know, I just kind of made a very simple entry into my space. Right? It's a little bit designy. It has kind of the same feel as what's happening inside, but it's slightly different because it is the outside. So this is going to be how I'm going to start to frame the entry into my environment. You will need to show some site elements, and the site elements include some entry stuff. So that might even include something like a step. So I'm going to do this very rough and rudimentary, but if I do something, well, I don't want to do it that way. Let me do this. And then grab that down, split this using that. There we go. Now I can pull this alone. Okay. So there is like a super simple, just, you know, I took the idea, I brought it to the outside, and I started shrouding the building. Now you guys will probably want to do a little bit more and carry it to either enclose the whole thing, or maybe just do, you know, like slats or like an algorithmic sort of thing around the outside that just skins it. It's up to you, but that's basically what I'm looking for on this exercise. So what questions do you have so far? Yes? No requirement for square footage. It's just you need to create an entry and you've got to shroud the building. That's basically it. Yeah. So you can do some cool architectural elements like we were talking about. Some architects that a few of us really like, I think, in this class, like Luis Barragan, right? So you could always just do stuff with, you know, cutting out holes and all that stuff on this kind of, let me do it this way. You can tell I like to use the Alt feature on, oh, that's right, I Booleaned it, never mind. I'll do it this way. Let's go like that. Let's go to about there. Okay, and I'm not going to do the full array thing. I'm just going to do a bunch of copies real quick, because mine doesn't need to be that accurate, but yours does. Boolean diff. Wow, that is not how you spell Boolean. Grab this, subtract these. There you go. Okay, so it's starting to look pretty interesting pretty quickly. I want this to be kind of rapid prototyping, okay? So don't overthink it. Just get your design concept, pull it to the outside, and then let's start focusing on how to render this thing. All right? What questions do you have? Okay, let me put this on the appropriate layer. Boom. Okay. All right, so I'm going to let you guys get into that a little bit, I think, before I start doing the interior color stuff. Well, actually, no. We should probably stay on the interior before you start doing this. So let's do some interior color tutorials and test renders, and then maybe by like 9-ish, we'll be able to release you guys, and you can have like the last hour of class to have some work time and start to work through your ideas and run them by me.